This edition of the Pest Geek Podcast is brought to you by Pest Routes. Pest Routes, supercharge your company with Pest Routes, the #1 pest control software to help you dominate your goals. Visit them at pestroutes.com and get your free demo.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your pest geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Stephen Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant with another episode of Living the Wildlife. Today I wanted to talk about where you could find some helpful resources that would assist you in training your workers or training yourself even on the management of various species in the wildlife damage management field. And the beauty of it is that it's no additional cost. Now, I say no additional cost because some of these items have been paid for already by your tax dollars. It's one of my pet peeves when people think that something that the government does and people call it free. It's not free. Americans have a really naive notion about what the government actually does and what it costs to talk about what the government does. We think the government does things for free. It doesn't do things for free. It's paid for by taxpayers. The point is that we treat it like it's free, even though it's not, because we don't have to pay for it again, because we're already paying for it. And so, enough of my little conservative diatribe there, but I think it's an important point. Whenever a politician tells you that this is free, they're lying to you, and that needs to speak about their either A, their intelligence, or B, their integrity, or C, both. In any event, this particular item is part of the, let me talk about what this source of information is. It's the Wildlife Damage Management Technical Series, and it's produced by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and specifically Wildlife Services. Now, if you're not familiar with that organization or that agency, Wildlife Services is a federal agency under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and their job is to assist in the management of wildlife species that are in conflict with human interests or are threatening endangered species, or are posing a potential health and disease threat. So they're also involved in, like, for example, protecting aircraft from bird strikes and from animal strikes. They're involved in various forms of studies involving zoonotic diseases like rabies, and they're also controlling feral hogs and coyotes and prairie dogs, depending on what state you're in and what they're involved with. So without getting too much into some of the political side of things, they're a hated organization because a lot of animal rights protest groups, of course, like to beat up on them. And of course, some of our wildlife control operators as well are not happy with wildlife services because some of them see wildlife services as a competitor to private industry. So they are certainly an organization under siege. So whether you love them or hate them, you should understand that a portion of wildlife services, about 10% of their budget, from what I understand, is dedicated to research. And so that is part of the National Wildlife Research Center in Fort Collins, Colorado. Now, they do some fine work at that agency. So if you decide to hate wildlife services for whatever reason, understand that if you're going to cast a stone, you might want to be more nuanced if you like the research side, because that part of that agency is involved in some important research, and that's the National Wildlife Research Center. And if you go to Google Scholar, you can find a lot of their publications there, because again, as a government agency, the papers that they write have to be available to the public because it's our tax dollars at work. So, but in any event, there's some wonderful researchers there, and there's some great people within wildlife services, whatever your opinion of them is, that I think that it's important for you to realize that you can find this information. So let's talk about these resources here. Again, it's the Wildlife Damage Management Technical Series. I'll send Frank the link to where this is. And so if you're familiar with the prevention control of wildlife damage, that's the last edition was the 4th edition, published in 1994, and it was a 2-volume set. The big blue books, they were 3-ring bound. If memory serves, somewhere close to 600 to 800 pages. It was called the Bible of Wildlife Control. But as you can tell, 1994 is pretty old, and despite how long we've been waiting for the 5th edition to come out, finally Wildlife Service says, well, we've waited a pretty long time, so why don't we begin the process of publishing articles and chapters of what we have that would be updates. And so that's what this basically is. So we don't call it the Prevention Control of Wildlife Damage Edition 5, but in practicality, it is, but it's in progress. So there are certainly a lot of gaps here, because the Prevention Control of Wildlife Damage 5th edition, the planning was to really step up the information and really add a lot more species and, of course, update all the chapters. But that, unfortunately, hasn't happened. So this particular site, where you can find these chapters, they're all updated and they're pretty state-of-the-art. Unfortunately, they don't have the breadth of the 1994 edition, because it's sort of not all the chapters have been written yet. So how do I know about this? Well, I have 2 chapters already published in this group. So I was originally writing for the Prevention Control of Wildlife Damage 5th edition, but like I said, things kind of hadn't gotten moved along with that. So I wanted to see those chapters see the light of day. So I submitted them to the USDA, and they were happy to have them. And I have one more still in the works that I've got to reach out to them about. But anyways, enough about me. What can you find at this particular website? So you can either go to the Geek Podcast website and get the link for this, or you can just simply Google these keywords, and I'll give them to you again: the Wildlife Damage Management Technical Series, and you may want to add USDA onto that as well, and you will come to this page on the aphis.usda.gov website. And this technical series has basically 4 sections. Scroll to the bottom. One section, the one that's populated the most, is on birds, and it has chapters discussing bird dispersal techniques, how to handle blackbirds, cedar waxwings, double-crested cormorants, European starlings, geese, ducks, coots, gulls, hawks and owls, herons and egrets, monk, parakeets, mute swans, sandhill and whooping cranes, vultures, and wild turkeys. The next section is mammals, of which there are only 2 chapters, and that's beavers and muskrats. Reptiles and amphibians don't have anything posted yet. And then finally, the last section is other, and that is where you find chapters on safety, wildlife at airports, wildlife carcass disposal, and wildlife translocation. Now, if wildlife carcass disposal sounds familiar to you, well, I did a podcast on this earlier. You may want to scroll back and find that particular podcast. But that's also based, to a large degree, if you're looking for a printed version of something that I've said, this would be that chapter there, the wildlife carcass disposal section will actually contain information that goes beyond what I did in my podcast. The other chapter that I've published here is on safety, and that's going to be a time for another podcast down the road. But you can see it's heavily weighted in the bird area because a lot of birds is something that Wildlife Service certainly handles. But understand there will be additional chapters, at least one more. I'm going to submit another one to them, as well as you may want to just sort of favorite this particular page, particularly if you're dealing with some bird issues, and then, of course, your mammals, and just simply come back to it from time to time, because these documents they are going to be very useful for you if you're interested in vertebrate pest control. They're free to download in the sense there's no additional cost. There's no additional charge for these. You just download their PDF files. Most of them are anyways. And you can print them out at will and hand them out to your workers or read them yourself or use them as a reference. And certainly be something that can be used for training in-house. If you're ever dealing with hawks and owls, obviously that's not a common species for most vertebrate pest controllers to handle. But, those odd calls do come. And even if you're not charging for the work, you may want to just simply tell the customer, hey, let me send you a publication. And you can get some goodwill out of it. You want to always get in the business of helping your clients, even if it's something you don't necessarily do on your own. So again, I think these are going to be useful. And so this is, in a sense, a slight advancement over the Prevention Control of Wildlife Damage Handbook, Volume 4, Version 4. This advances that information. I hope that more of the authors that were involved in the 5th edition would make sure they contribute their chapters for this to make so we can see this information see the light of day, which would be very important, because as great as the Prevention Control of Wildlife Damage Handbook was, it is quite dated at this point, and so a lot of the techniques have really evolved far beyond what you have there. It doesn't mean it's worthless. It's available online if you want to go search for it. But we've really come a long way in the control. I can just think of the raccoon chapter alone is incredibly outdated because the technology, we now have encapsulated foot traps. But so enough about that. But I just wanted to show you that this is an important source that you may not know about, and it's your tax dollars at work. You might as well get a return on your investment for that to get some really solid information from people who really know a lot about particularly bird control. These would be very, very helpful for you to really round out this information, because the peer review process for these publications is pretty high. You're dealing with people that aren't just armchair folks. These are folks that have often been out in the field doing the job and can tell you what works and what doesn't, but it also has a lot of science background, because some of the information that's contained in here was discovered based on research that was done by the National Wildlife Research Center. So again, this is something that I think you will find helpful and will put money in your wallet, and it's and without an additional cost to what you're already paying. And I hope that it's something that's going to be used, because there's so much mythology in the wildlife control field. It's important that we have quality sources of information to start pushing back against much of the mythology that's in this industry. And this particular website will be helpful to reducing that mythology. I'm Stephen Van Tassel for Wildlife Control Consultant. Have a great day. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.